Hello, I'm Greg with Cromwell Wrights, and this is part 2 of our 2025 LRF Ballistic Binocular comparison. In the previous video, we showed you how these units performed in the extreme cold that the South Dakota winters have to offer. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the raw ranging performance. So just how good is the laser in these units? How consistent is the reading that we can get on it? We have actual footage through each of these laser range finding binoculars, and we're going to compare the performance on steel targets at various ranges, reflective targets such as that of a road sign, and then actual animals. So we went and found some deer and some pronghorn to do some ranging through each of these units. And I've been playing with all of them for several months. So this isn't like I just did an unboxing of each one of these units and I played around with them for 10 minutes and here I am going to tell you about it. Folks, I've been using all of the binoculars in this test extensively. There is one thing that I would like you to keep in mind when you watch this video, and that is it is very difficult to capture the essence of how each of these laser range finding binoculars actually looks, because the cameras are not like your eyes, and your eyes are going to be vastly superior to anything that you see here in this video. So it wouldn't be fair and it wouldn't be technically correct to compare the image quality that you see in each of these units during this video. Instead, I'm going to share my feelings with you because it's easier for me to explain how I felt that each of them looked with my words than it is to give you an adequate comparison with the video. And then in post-processing, when we're editing this footage, can be made to look kind of however we feel like. And so the color grading and things that happen in post-processing would probably kind of mess up the whole program anyways. And then if we leave the footage raw and don't touch it, well then oftentimes it'll look significantly worse than the human eye would perceive that image anyway. So some parts of this test are going to be very analytical and very matter of fact. For instance, the raw ranging capability and the numbers that these units are capable of producing, that's very much not open for debate because they worked how they worked and you can see the numbers for yourselves. Some of the other things, for instance, the ergonomics of how the binoculars feel in the hand, how easy they are to point, how natural they are to point, stuff like that is very subjective. The glass quality itself, the types of image that I perceive to be pleasing might be different for some of you out there. And so that's why it's mostly me sharing my feelings on a lot of this stuff. Please do use your judgment and keep that in mind while you're watching this video. I've come up with a rating system here that will help me properly convey to you how I feel each of these units stack up against each other. That rating system is shown here on the bottom of the screen. And basically it's a mill system, which I like. And if we have something that's rated down towards the left edge of the screen, that's going to be the worst type of performance. So I'm not going to think very highly of something that's displayed over there on the left side of the scale. Conversely, up towards the number 10 on the right side of the scale, that's going to be the best performance on the scale. So if you see me weight a particular item down on the left, that's not very good. If it's on the right, then that's a very good in terms of my opinion of the topic that we're discussing. Just as before, I want to acknowledge the help of EuroOptic when it comes to the production of this video. As those of you that watched the previous video, you know that the 3 units that I didn't have on hand, EuroOptic graciously loaned those units to us to do this testing. I've been purchasing from EuroOptic for well over a decade, not had poor experiences with them. They're great to deal with. And the guy that I deal with over there, his name is Kiefer. And so if you'd like to call and get something ordered, give Kiefer a call and I'm sure he'll be able to help you out. And again, I have no financial obligation to say anything about EuroOptic in this video. They didn't require it and they didn't even really ask for it. They're just a good company to deal with and they have a absolutely vast amount of inventory on hand at all times. And so when I'm looking for something, they tend to be one of the first places that I look because their pricing structure is very competitive and the inventory they have on hand is so impressive. The first target presentations we will have is right here on the Promolrite's home range. So we've got steel targets that are 12 inches wide and 24 inches tall from the very top to the very bottom. So most of these targets, they're roughly 18 inches on the torso with a little 6-inch head on the top of them. So 18 by 24. The farther target is a full-size IPSC target. It's important to understand the scale of these targets because it bears directly on how well they will perform in your shooting situation on the steel targets that you're engaging. Now, it goes without saying here, the smaller the plate is, the harder it's going to be for these units to pick it up. These are very common target presentation sizes that you'll have at various different events. And we go from very large, the 200-yard target, obviously. That is absolutely gigantic, having a target like that at 200 yards. But by the time we get out to 700 yards, it's a much smaller, more normal presentation, very similar to what you would see in any of your competitive events, such as NRL or PRS. First, we're going to validate the ranges using the Vectronix Vector 23. Many of you may have seen this laser rangefinder in some of our previous videos, but this is a roughly $25,000 range-finding unit, and it is infinitely capable. I mean, you can range something like the size of a building out to like 25,000 yards, and we can range something as small as a prairie dog with absolute efficiency and confidence out to about 25 or 2,600 yards. Probably what I would consider to be the gold standard in precise ranging tech. Obviously, many of you are not going to go out and purchase a rangefinder that costs as much as a decent used pickup. Okay? So I understand that information has next to no value for you, but it is noteworthy that we can get ultra precise ranges, and having that unit allows me to properly vet all of these other units to see what kind of actual accuracy we're getting. Because how would we know otherwise? Unless you stretch a tape measure or something like that, it's going to be very hard for you to get ranges that are precise several hundred yards away to compare the accuracy of these other units with. The order of the tests, I'm going to try to keep the same as we go through this. We'll start with the Sig Kilo 6K. That is the least expensive and most compact binocular in the test. So something is definitely off here, and I can tell right away because the aiming point that I'm having here is I'm not getting a solid reading off of the center of this aiming reticle, the little circle in the middle. And so what I'm doing here is hunting around trying to figure out where the laser is actually firing, because it's obvious to me that it's not firing in the center. Next up is the discontinued Vortex Fury 5000 AB. And now the Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2. As you can see, we've identified another laser misalignment. Next is the Revic Acura BLR10b. Yet another misaligned laser. Now the Vectronix Vector X. And the Vector X with the range extenders, taking us to 17 magnification. The Swarovski EL Range. the Leica Geovid Pro. Now you'll notice I'm really struggling with this test. I'm taking quite a while to get this one done, and that's because I'm having a problem seeing the aiming reticle. The camera, the frame rate is not picking it up very good, and then too, it's very dim. It's a pretty bright day out here, and we've got a lot of light colored vegetation still, and I'm having a lot of trouble picking this thing up. I subsequently got into the settings and was able to crank the brightness up for the rest of the tests, but I wanted to use all of the units as they came out of the box, and this is how this one was delivered. And it doesn't appear to have an auto brightness function, which is pretty disappointing. Obviously, there was some beam alignment issues with some of the units. I tried my very best to show you kind of where the beam was pointing. So after a little while of poking around with each of these units, you can get to know where the laser is actually pointing. Because a lot of them, if you noticed, are not in the very center of the ranging reticle. And that, folks, is unacceptable. It doesn't matter which model or which make or which manufacturer. If you can't point these things and have the laser be in the middle of your aiming zone, then you will have a very low confidence when you're out using these things in the field. The divergence is angular, meaning we're using the reticle very much in a linear fashion, but the divergence is angular. That means when you're at closer or mid-range distances, your offset will be this much. But at farther distances, the offset grows. And so you have to use some kind of a range relationship to see just how far off the center of aim point you would have to hold in order to get a reliable reading.
That's just stupid.
This is entirely unacceptable behavior for a rangefinder to exhibit. We're firing a laser that's flying perfectly straight, but it's pointed somewhere other than where our aiming reticle would have us point. That situation will create an extraordinarily difficult confidence problem to overcome in the field. Now, on our rating system below, I want to make sure you understand that I'm going to be rating this based on my confidence in these units. So it's not just the raw ranging number here that I'm always looking at, but it's how confident am I that I'm going to be getting the right range to be able to make an impact with your average performing cartridge. Something like a 6.5 PRC or a Creedmoor or something like that. Something that maybe doesn't have the most impressive ballistics, but isn't the worst either. Kind of right in the middle of the road in terms of its performance capabilities. So the confidence that I have in whether or not I can point and click and get a real range to the target. Now you'll notice here I'm not talking about the firing solution that the rangefinder is producing because that's kind of a separate affair. What software is it using to do the calculation and give us a firing solution? So here's how I'd rate these units on a confidence scale. On the low end, we've got the Sig Kilo 6K. Now this is not super surprising because it is the smallest, the most compact of the units. It's also the cheapest of the units. Now the raw ranging capability of this thing did okay. But because of the massive divergence that I saw from the actual aiming reticle to where the laser was actually firing, we're going to rate this thing pretty low. My confidence level on where I could engage a deer-sized animal and be very confident that I'm going to be able to point the thing at the animal, get my exact range, and make a good hit, that's going to end at about 400 or 500 yards with this unit. It just doesn't have the confidence-boosting capability that you can just point and click and know for sure that you've got a really good, accurate range. The Vortex Fury HD 5000 AB is got a laser in it that actually punches way above its weight class. For the price that you're paying to get one of these units, it is incredible how good of a range-finding unit it has in it. The laser is firing pretty much in the center of our optical display, and the readings that it's giving are quick and relatively precise, all things considered. Next, we'll talk about the Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2. This unit has an actual crosshair for an aiming point. I found that to be both really cool and kind of strange in a few instances. It really depends on the size of the target and how we're going to engage and range the target. You'll also notice that the very center of the crosshair isn't actually where the laser was firing. It seemed like the laser was just a little high of the aim point. So here we are again with another unit that isn't firing the laser where the aim point suggests it should be. And the big excuse from all the manufacturers and why they don't use etched reticles in them is because it's very costly to align where the laser's firing to where the actual reticle is being displayed. And they claim that using a projected reticle is easier to align because they can adjust the location of where that projected aiming point is in relation to where the laser is. But we don't seem to see that here. In every one of these units that have an aiming error, they have a projected reticle, which that doesn't help anybody. So if you're going to have a projected reticle, then at least have the quality control in place to make sure that each of your lasers are pointing where the projected reticle is. The Revic is also a projected aim point, and it's back to a traditional circle style, relatively fat in its proportions also. And just like the Sig Kilo 6K and 10K Gen 2, the Revic also has a laser that is not pointing in the center of the aim point. You can see I'm having to hold the reticle off to the left side in order to get a real range of these targets. So we're going to rate this one pretty low as well. The Vectronix Vector X is the only unit in the test that has an etched reticle. So this reticle is fixed and etched into the glass permanently, like you would see on a traditional rifle scope. It powers up and it projects the firing solution in the distance for us, and all the information that we see in there is projected. But who cares where it's being projected as long as we can see it adequately in the viewfinder? And I didn't have any issues with that in this unit. And as you'll notice, it appears that the laser is firing right where the reticle is. This unit did run the steel plates, didn't seem to have any real issues in doing so. And so bravo to Vectronix for their execution here. The Vector X with the range extenders on takes us from the base magnification of 12 power up to 17 power. And you can certainly see that as we look through this thing. The target presentations are much larger. We can see much more detail. Now, the ranging performance didn't seem to be affected at these closer ranges. As you can see, this unit was able to run the targets out just as well as the other. And we didn't seem to have any particular laser misalignment here either. And keep in mind, this is a completely separate unit. This is not the same binocular that I just installed the range extenders on. This was a separate unit altogether. Next up, the Swarovski, and you can see here that we've got a strange thing going on with the ability of the camera, and the kind of frames per second we're running in the camera are not exactly liking whatever frame rate the projected display is running at. So we've got a very herky-jerky type of display here, and I apologize for you, but just understand that that's not the visual representation that you see with your eyes when you're looking through this unit. It's very much just like any of the other units when you're looking through it with human eyes, but the camera has trouble dealing with this on some models. And this is something we've seen over the years. Every rangefinder that I've ever tested, anything that has an optical display in it, runs at a frequency, and that frequency isn't always going to jive well with the camera equipment that we're using to record it. Also keep in mind, I'm looking at the camera display in order to aim these things. So it's not just that you're seeing it all freaking out like this and being inconsistent. It's that I'm trying to range the targets while it's doing that, while I'm looking on this little tiny display and get it lined up properly. So you'll have to forgive some of the not quite so perfect placements that I have on some of these target engagements with some of these units, namely the Swarovski and the Leica. Both the Swarovski and the Leica exhibited this strange behavior when it comes to the frame rate and the ability of the camera to adequately see what's going on. And again, both units, it's not like that using them in person. The Swarovski didn't seem to have trouble running all of these targets as well. Now, the etched aim point that we saw in the Vector X's, that's probably my favorite aim point. Once you have a fixed reticle in your rangefinder or your rangefinding binoculars, you probably find it kind of hard to go away from it, because just pulling it up and having the reticle be there all the time is really nice for ranging. Now, when you're sitting there and looking through these things for hours and hours, 8 hours a day for a week and a half or 2 weeks of hunting season, the reticle can kind of be distracting. So it just depends on what you're doing. So the Leica has probably the best projected reticle of all of the units. It has a very precise, very crisp projected display, whereas all of the other units have a kind of fuzzy, kind of ghosted display. And I did make sure that I had the ocular adjusted on all of these units. And so I'm sharing the experience that I had with my eyes here. It's hard to focus the lenses and everything that's going on in the optics to the camera, especially when I'm doing a test like this where I'm bouncing from one unit to the next unit, and I'm trying to do that before things get away or before the light changes too fast. And so it's a very high-stress testing environment. And I've done my best, but please don't judge any of the units too harshly based on the experience that you're seeing by watching the footage. Having said that, I can tell you how I felt about these units, and that from a reticle aiming point standpoint, the Leica by far had the best projected aim point. You'll see that the Leica Geovids had no issue ranging any of these steel targets. Let's move the distance out a little bit and go to something that's a little harder to deal with. Here we've got a road sign presentation at the apex of a hill. And you can see that I've got one road sign there in plain view, nice bright yellow new road sign. And then just behind it a ways, there's a back of a road sign. So non-reflective, but again at the apex of the hill and kind of almost obscured by the hill even. This is a great representation of a relatively easy to range target right next to a target that's a little more challenging to range. Let's have a look at how all these units do in this situation. Now, isn't it interesting that we were able to read a 1760 some odd over here, so we're at roughly a mile, and we can range that reflective sign with ease with every single unit. Now, that's pretty astonishing for a $900 pair of binoculars. But then on the other side of the equation, we kept seeing a 1900 and some odd pop up. And I know many of you are thinking, oh, well, that's that non-reflective sign. But look a little more closely. What you're actually seeing reported is the tiny little corner of another reflective sign off on the horizon there. That other reflective sign is the one that you are seeing reported as far as the actual range. So the beam divergence on all of these things is so large that we're aiming over here, but it's actually picking up something over here. And it's kicking back a signal off of the most reflective thing out there. Now, granted, I really hope that many of you aren't out there shooting road signs. So the performance that we're seeing here on the road sign isn't that important. What I wanted to demonstrate was that a heavily reflective surface is an extremely easy thing for even the cheap units to range. Whereas that non-reflective surface, even though it's made out of the same material, is not going to kick back that laser with as much effectiveness. And the laser, due to the fact that the beam divergence, the square area that that beam is covering out there is so large, it can give you a false positive, and you really need to watch out for that, especially as you start approaching the ends of the actual capabilities of these range-finding units. You'll see here the actual range to that non-reflective sign as seen by the Vector 23. Which is, of course, very easily able to range that target at that distance. Frankly, there could be a prairie dog standing on the top of that hill at a mile, and I would have no problem ranging that little guy with the Vector 23. Next, we've got a deer standing here. Now, this deer was kind of lazy, but at the same time, it was moving around a little bit. Now, this big doe was standing there, and then there was also a fawn that kind of subsequently went and bedded down there. Let's take a look at these units ranging this deer. As you can see, in this particular target engagement, where we've got a relatively steep slope right behind the animal, we can get, I would say, a fairly good confidence level. If you were shooting a relatively flat shooting cartridge, a powerful Magnum or something like that, you'd be able to engage this deer and have a high probability of a hit with just about any one of these units. Now, this target scenario that we're presenting here is one of the more difficult ranging scenarios that we're going to come up with here. We've got roughly the same distance at play. Getting an accurate range on pronghorn can be a little more difficult. They're a little bit smaller of an animal, their coloration makes it a little harder, and then the pronghorn are usually found in relatively flat expanses of territory. You don't often find them in the rough stuff like you would, say, a mule deer. You typically have your target animal standing there and there's nothing behind it for quite a ways. And so it can be difficult to get the actual range. More importantly, it's even tougher when there's several of them kind of clustered up in the same area because our beam divergence is wide and the beam is actually hitting multiple animals at the same time. And how do we know which one we're aiming at? The one in the front could be 50, 60 yards closer than the one in the back, but they're very tightly packed to each other because it's so flat. This is a very typical target presentation when you're out after pronghorn, and it's something that the rangefinders struggle with greatly. This is the kind of target presentation that misses are made of if you don't have a very good laser rangefinder and a very good technique in how to deploy it. Conversely, you can see as some of these animals started to move up on the hillside, where we had the ground presented not very far behind the target animal, well, then the laser rangefinder was very easily able to differentiate between what is animal and what is background. And it could compute that difference and give us the real range to the target, or as close as that we could actually get. So that means these pronghorn that were 950, 975, 1,000 yards away, that's actually a higher probability shot compared to the ones that were down there on the flat. This is very much the responsibility of the operator to know your equipment, know its limitations, and know how to work within those limitations. Rather than do an entirely new video in part 3 and part 4 and part 5 and farm you guys for as many clicks and as many ad views as I can, let's talk about the other aspects that are important when choosing a laser rangefinding binocular. The ergonomics. How fun is it to hold on to these things? I would rate them about like this. Obviously, the tiny one, the Sig Kilo 6K, maximum portability. This thing's super easy to hold on to and point. You don't even hardly feel it when you're carrying it around. It's so tiny. So we're going to rate this thing very high on the scale. And there's 3 units in the test that are basically identical in terms of their size, bulk, and weight. And that is the Vortex, the Sig Kilo 10K, and the Revic. These things are so close in how they look, how they feel, and how much they weigh. I swear they must roll out of the same factory. I don't know that that's true, folks, but these things are nearly identical to each other in just about every way, and diameters that they have here and there, and just how they feel in the hand, and all of that. So ergonomically, these guys are literally all going to be stacked right on top of each other. There's nothing that I can perceive to be different about one versus the other. Mostly the same experience here. Next up, we've got the Vector X. It's a little bulkier, and I've got the tripod mounted to the bottom of this thing. Kind of digs into my hand a little bit, and I've got to compensate for that when I'm holding on to it. And granted, you wouldn't have to have this thing attached, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to point when you're not using a tripod. When you put up on a tripod, however, it is marvelous, because then you don't have to hold on to it hardly at all. You just kind of cradle it, and you're using the tripod to support the weight. Now, the ergonomics when we attach the range extenders, obviously, now we've got the largest, bulkiest, and heaviest of this entire test. If we took the range extenders off and just had the regular Bino, well, then it'd be right there in the hunt with all of the others, because the Vector X, the Swarovski EL Range, and the Leica are all virtually identical in terms of their size and weight. Pretty much the same experience amongst all of them. In terms of how they felt in the hand, though, folks, none of these binoculars, I didn't have any problems holding on to them or pointing them naturally and engaging targets with them. It was all very simple and matter of fact. How about the focusing aspect of that? How easy is it to get it on the target and get it in focus? Well, all of these units, with the exception of one, is just fine. Folks, the Vector X has the worst focusing ring that I've experienced on any binocular ever. It's a very loose feeling, and then there's a bunch of freewheeling both directions on it. I think maybe that's so you don't accidentally nudge it or something.
Because you're stupid. Stop it. Really,
So much so that I manufactured a little zip-tied locking mechanism for it, so you can stick a ring on there and just lock it in place so that it doesn't accidentally get moved, because I seemed to always be accidentally moving it. So not a fan. Super low rating on the Vector X focus adjustment. All the rest of the units, I'm going to rate them all right there, and they all work pretty much identically after that. Very easy to get along with from a focusing standpoint. How about optical clarity? This is something that's hard for you to see with the limitations of the camera, but very easy for me to experience. Optical clarity, we're going to go ahead and put the fatigue factor in with the optical clarity here. So I'm not just going to be talking about how clear or how bright or how easy to resolve the images are, so how high resolution, the field of view, the crispness from the center to the outer perimeters of the viewing space, so whether or not the edge-to-edge clarity is there. I'm going to wrap all of that into one metric here, and we're just going to call it optical clarity. From an optical standpoint, I would say that the Vortexes are probably the worst. They just are not very nice to look through. Very kind of dark and strange looking image compared to the others. And even the Sig Kilo 6K was, I felt, better to look through in terms of optical clarity, despite its much smaller scale and much smaller lensing. Now, one thing very specifically that I want to talk about is the fatigue element. The effect that I'm talking about here is when you pick up a pair of binoculars, or any optic really, and you look through it for an extended period of time, does it feel like it's going to suck the eyeballs out of your head? I know there's a very scientific approach to all of this, but some optics, when I look through them, it strains my eyes, and I can't look through them for very long before I have to just rub my eyes and just, wow, all that is like brutal to look through, and it really tires out my eyes, and I can feel the tension building behind my eyes almost. I'm sure many of you have experienced this effect before. The Vortex, the Sig Kilo 10K, and the Revic, looking through these things for an extended period of time is like having two very powerful shop vacs glued to my eye sockets. Within a half an hour of looking through these units, it literally feels like someone is sucking my eyeballs out of my skull. I mean, it is very fatiguing. And you'll notice that the size and configuration of the lensing in these things is probably pretty similar amongst the units due to their exterior similarities. And so it's no surprise to me that they all kind of have that same feeling. Just not nice to look through at all. From an image clarity standpoint, the Revics and the Sigs, the 10K, are pretty much identical to each other in terms of looking through them. There's some slight coloration differences, obviously, but the overall experience is basically the same, how they felt to me when I was looking through them. In a location all its own here on the scale is the Vector X, because a very strange thing, it's got a very nice looking optical presentation to it, but it's only nice in the center 50 to 60% of the viewable area. Once we get out towards the edges, we seem to lose focus, so we don't have clarity all the way to the outside. Now, this is an effect, it's different than fisheye. Fisheye would be like, hey, it's mostly in focus, but it's got this curved and blown out type of situation to it. That would be like 1,000 times worse. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about edge-to-edge clarity, not fisheye. And the edge-to-edge clarity on the Vector X's is just not very good. Now, these are the 12 power models. I don't have any of the 10 power models to compare against, but I'm told through various people in the industry that the 10 power is much nicer to look through. It has much better edge-to-edge clarity. And that would make sense because, generally speaking, at lower magnifications, it's easier for them to have a more relaxed prescription and provide a much better viewing experience. I'm in no position to refute or confirm that, but it makes sense that the 10 powers would be a little bit better on the edge-to-edge clarity, if not just completely better altogether. But the center viewable area is very clean. It was actually a very pleasing image looking through these things, and I didn't have the feeling that I was getting my eyeballs sucked out of my head with the Vector X's at all. When you put the range extenders on, obviously the light transmission gets choked down dramatically. So the low light performance with the range extenders on, not nearly as good, not good at all. And the field of view is constricted, obviously, that's to be expected. But one thing I was not expecting was, in order to get an in-focus image, I had to take the focus ring and max it out. So I had to run it all the way to one side in order to have an in-focus image with the extenders on. I had no play whatsoever to go any further than that. So that resulted in objects that were farther away being a little fuzzy, which kind of stinks because I have the range extenders so I can see further away. But I essentially ran out of focus ability and couldn't get them as in focus as I wanted to. The Swarovski EL range is the most impressive optically of any of the optics tested here. The edge-to-edge clarity is there. Looking at stuff with the Swaros is a treat. It is an absolute wonder. how clear and how stress-free the viewing is through these Swarovski binoculars. Now, this is not a new thing. Many of you have experience with Swarovski binoculars and would confirm the same thing that I'm saying. They are wondrous to look through. And the EL Range 10x42s here are no exception. They are amazing to look through. You can detect things that you cannot see through any of the other units with the Swaros. The resolution, clarity, the brightness, the tone of the image is very realistic, and I am a huge fan of the Swarovskis to look through. The Leica Geovid Pros are right there with the Swarovskis, but they are just a little bit further down the scale. The image is a little darker, a little more matte in nature, and the field of view through them is definitely much narrower. The edge-to-edge clarity is pretty good, but it's not Swarovski good. I don't think that that's going to stop any of you from having a good viewing experience through the Leicas, but it is debatable whether or not that smaller field of view, the matteness of the color, whether you have as much success staring at a mountainside looking for the little ear flick on an elk or maybe the tip of an antler moving in the dark shadows and stuff like that. The way that we use these binoculars in many instances, it's debatable whether or not you'd have as much success with the Leica as you would the Swarovski. So I'm going to give the edge here to the Swarovski, and I'm going to put the Leica just beneath it in optical quality. It's very close, but there's a decided difference between the two of them. I've shown a few other people the binoculars, and I didn't comment to them about which one is nicer. I just said, hey, here, play with these. Tell me which one you think looks the best to look through. And to the man, every single person that I've showed these things to liked the Swarovskis better than all the rest of them. Now, what's noteworthy here is that the Vector X is in a very similar price point to the Revic and the Sig Kilo 10K. And for the money, there's no question which of these binoculars I would pick. I would for sure get the Vector X before I got either the Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2 or the Revics. Because, hey, it's nice to be able to look through these things without feeling like somebody's taking a wiffle ball bat to your eyeballs. That brings us to the final element that I want to discuss here, and that's just the overall value. How much value do I think is being brought by these different binoculars at their respective price points? And so this is just a very arbitrary thing that I'm going to share my feelings on. But, you know, if pressed, it's not like I'm going to die on this hill. Maybe some of you in your use case, doing what you're going to be doing with the binoculars, would see much more value on the other side of the spectrum. For a different unit, you think that one would be bringing more value to you. And I think that's wonderful. And again, that's why I appreciate the support from EuroOptic on this, is because I'm not selling any of these, okay? So I don't care what you think about it or whether you like my opinion on this subject or how I feel about these things. At the end of the day, I don't care if you go buy one or not. It makes no never mind to me whether you own one or don't own one, or which one you own if you do decide to buy one. The point is, some of these things are going to be giving you a lot of capability for the dollar spent, and others are not so much. Obviously, the Vortex is discontinued. So if you can find one, it's going to be either a holdover, just somebody's got one sitting there and they're happy to sell it to you for a discounted price, or maybe you'll find one on the used market and you can pick one up relatively cheap there. So I've seen some of these Vortex units going for the same price as the Sig Kilo 6K. So if your budget is low, for sure go for the Vortex, because it is a huge value for the dollar spent down there on the bottom end. So if you got $1,000 to throw at this problem, go and pick up the Vortex. It's an incredible unit for the money. The next pricing tier is pretty much identical. The Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2, the Revic, and the Vector X occupy nearly the exact same price point. Plus or minus $100, $200 here or there. Makes no never mind when you're making a decision that's going to cost you $2,700 minimum no matter what you do. And so they all have an equal price point. And if you're in that middle class of price point, my recommendation would be for the Vector X, because it is an extremely versatile little binocular. There's not another binocular in this test that I'm aware of that has the factory-provided range extenders, where you can essentially crank up the magnification just by screwing on a little adapter. So that's awesome. The tripod mounting solutions, that's also awesome. And it provides a ton of versatility in how you would deploy these things. how stress-free it's going to be to sit behind them for hours on end, pass them between all of your different buddies and stuff like that. The versatility of the mounting solutions, the overall value that you get, the etched reticle. But for that class of price point where you're spending on the plus side of $2,500, the Vector X is an easy pick. Now, if the world's your oyster and you can make these decisions without a financial element, well, God bless you, because that's a wonderful position to be in. And making a decision regardless of price is always the best way to make a decision. You're going to get led to the best product for you and your use case. Let what you're going to be doing with it drive which one is right. So if viewing pleasure and long hours of viewing and having a super realistic and crystal clear image is what's important to you, with a wide field of view and a stress-free viewing is what's important to you, well then the Swarovski is probably the one you want to choose, because it's by far the nicest one to look through. But if you have a heavier emphasis on getting a better ranging experience, and you're willing to sacrifice just a little bit, not much, but just a little bit of visual clarity and field of view, well, then you'd probably want to go for the Geovid Pros instead. Not to give you a spoiler for the next video, but it's also got a better workflow in terms of getting a firing solution out of the thing. Putting the wind velocity and vector in there is also easier. So there's a little spoiler for you for the next video. If I had to pick between the Swarovski and the Leica, and it's raw shooting that concerns me, I would pick the Leica. Now let's talk about the warranty. I went to each manufacturer's website and tried to find the information about how long they're going to warranty these things and what for. And here is what I've compiled. Now, I can't vouch 100% for the accuracy of this because some of these manufacturers' websites are extremely vague and stupid when it comes to the warranty information. Seriously, Revic? 2 years on electronics on a rangefinder that cost over $2,500? Yeah, I don't think so. Vectronix and Swarovski, 3 years? And then, like, the information on your website is so vague that I can't even really figure out what's going on when it comes to warranty. So basically, it's like, oh, we give you our money, and then you kind of do whatever you want. And that's what it seems like. Swarovski, your whole presentation with the graph and all the fact that you need a graph to describe your warranty means that you failed at warranty, okay? Everybody needs to take a page out of Vortex's book here, just like Sig did, which very simple. We pay you money, and then you make sure that we're good, like forever, okay? This stuff is expensive enough to where you're clearing way too much money and demonstrating way too little faith in your own products to not be offering a forever warranty. So get with the program. Now, at this point, I wish that I could tell you guys out there. I wish that I could tell you. Well, here's the one that I would pick if it were me. But folks, I can't do that. I am not willing to endorse any of these units. In my opinion, they all miss the mark in some area. None of them are what I would call complete. None of them are the final word in the discussion on ballistic laser rangefinding binoculars. There's improvements to be had on all of them. Because if the Leica gave me the viewing experience that I got in the Swarovski, that would be my number one choice, and I wouldn't think twice about it. If the Swarovski had better workflows in it, and it functioned more like some of the other units, I would pick that one in a heartbeat without question. If the Vector had better edge-to-edge clarity and had better optical performance and had a better workflow in how you go about getting a firing solution out of the thing, well, I would pick that one above everything else. And so you see, as we go down the line, unit to unit, there's just too many problems with all of these things. It actually blows me away that it's 2025 and we're sitting here still not having the ultimate solution from somebody on all of these units. On one hand, it's impressive because, hey, they're all pretty much like each other. On the other hand, It's so unimpressive because they're all pretty much like each other. And they're missing a critical feature that would push them over the edge, and I would give my endorsement for that product at that point. And you'll see this emphasized greatly in the next video where I talk about the actual workflow. How do we go about getting a fiery solution? Can we trust these things to point them at a target, hit the button, dial what we see in the display, and actually make a hit? And you'll see some of my comments emphasized in that video. It's shocking how bad some of them are. It's like, was there even a rifle shooter present when some of these interfaces were being designed? Like, did anybody realize what we're having to do out here when we're shooting rifles? It's comically bad. But we'll cover a bunch of that stuff in part 3 of this series on laser range-finding ballistic binoculars. Anyone who rebukes a mocker will get an insult in return. Anyone who corrects the wicked will get hurt. So don't bother correcting mockers. They will only hate you. But correct the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be even wiser. Teach the righteous, and they will learn even more. Now you know why, when somebody makes a negative comment, I vaporize them. Right here in the scripture, it says, hey, if somebody doesn't like you, if somebody's causing problems like this, if somebody's mocking you and causing all kinds of dissent, you don't respond to them. You don't talk to them. You don't try to convince them. You don't try to teach them. You spend 0 energy on them. Instead, you spend your energy on the wise people so that they can become wiser. You spend your energy on the righteous so that they can learn more. And that's exactly what I try to do here. I'm not always successful. I know, like some of you, the modern world tries to trap me and make me feel like I have to engage with these people. But the truth is right here in the scripture. You do not have to engage. You should not engage. It should make no difference to you, and you should just focus your efforts on those that are deserving of it. So I thank those of you that are here watching it. Obviously, you are deserving of it. And I appreciate your presence, and I'm going to keep making these videos for you people that are wise, that are righteous. And I'm going to try my very best to give you more wisdom so that you can be more righteous still in your pursuit of this discipline. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time.